Hey, and welcome back. In the stockpile of drums I've either been given for free or picked off of sites like Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, and Goodwill, there's a few junior-sized drums that have been sitting on my shelf, awaiting for me to come up with a project to use them for. Over the last year, I've used a number of these drums in different projects, but I've been hoping to find a use for these two sound percussion drums, and in today's video, I'm finally going to get around to doing something with them. I won these drums, along with another set of junior drums, on a Goodwill auction back in 2021 for around $15. I think since they were listed as pickup only, the demand was pretty small, and I was able to grab them for next to nothing. I've used some of these drums for parts, and last year when I built my set of concert toms, I used one of the drums from the sound percussion set for the smallest 8-inch tom. In my time tearing apart cheap drums, typically the hardware is absolute junk. But with these sound percussion drums, distributed pretty much exclusively through Guitar Center and Musician's Friend, the hardware is actually pretty well built and seems to be closer on par with being an actual instrument and not a toy. I don't currently own either a 10-inch snare or a 16-inch bass drum, and since I'm a hoarder of all things drums, I figured maybe I would just take these two drums apart, spruce them up, and see how good I could get them sounding for either some tight hip-hop-like sounds or a quick grab-and-go travel setup for some very light music. So I started off by grabbing this snare and stripped off all the tension rods, hoops, and heads using a drum key. Then I moved on to removing the lugs, snare throw, and butt plate with a screwdriver. Lastly, I removed the air vent grommet with a set of pliers, and then finally the sound percussion badge, again with a screwdriver. After I had the shell totally stripped of hardware, I could take a razor blade to break the glue seam of the wrap and peel back the wrap very carefully to get a look at the raw wood of the shell. I try to do this slowly to avoid any of the adhesive ripping out any wood fibers, but usually there's not a ton of glue holding these wraps onto the shell. After I finished the snare, I moved on to the bass drum and again repeated the same process. In taking the time to remove all of these pieces, I was pretty impressed with the quality level of these lugs, hoops, and other hardware mounted to the shell. I've worked on a lot of other budget or off-brand drums that have absolute garbage hardware, and these sound percussion drums really do have some great components included for a cheap child-sized drum kit. After I had the bass drum stripped, I took these shells up to my garage to begin the process of prepping these drums to be refinished. So to start, I wanted to plug a few holes on the bass drum from where the tom cymbal post bracket was installed, and I debated leaving this here as it could be useful for mounting something off the kick, but honestly, with this drum being so small, I couldn't see myself mounting a full-size cymbal off this kick and not have it fall over or lose balance. I was able to find the right size dowel to plug the mounting holes, and I quickly cut off pieces and glued them into the shell, and when it came time to find a dowel for the larger post holes, I had to run to my local hardware store and grab a larger one to get the right fit. After I had all the dowels glued in and cut with a flush cut saw, I went over them with an orbital sander to smooth them out and get a nice profile in line with the shell. Next, I went over both shells with a heat gun to try and remove any adhesive left on the shell before going over those areas with a sander. One of my biggest weaknesses as a woodworker is my impatience when it comes to tasks like sanding. And I've refinished plenty of drums where I didn't get a good finish because I was too eager to move past the prep and get right to the finishing. So my advice to others is don't rush through these steps, and if you do, you're going to regret it later. Once everything was sanded and looking good, I could finally move on to refinishing, and for these drums, I thought a nice, rich, warm stain would be a really good way to step up the overall appearance of these drums. Initially, my plan was just to add stain to the outside of the shell, but as I got going, I decided to stain the interior of these shells as well, because 1, it's a lot easier than taping off the edges and inside, and 2, I think it gives the shell a more cohesive look. After the shells were stained and dried, I could move on to clear coating, and for these drums, I thought a nice high gloss finish would really set it apart, so I began the process of spraying and letting it dry for a number of coats. In my time working with spray poly, I found it takes way more coats to get a nice high gloss finish, but it creates way less need for sanding in between coats to get rid of any brush marks. Over the next 3 days, I added probably between 8 to 10 coats of finish, leaving anywhere from 2 to 4 hours between coats to let it dry before reapplying. It really only takes 1 to 2 minutes to do this, unless I'm sanding between that specific coat, and honestly, it takes more time for me to set up my camera to film it. But finally, after a few days, I was ready to bring these shells back downstairs and get ready to reassemble these drums and get to using them. I grabbed some heads out of my large stockpile and was able to dig up a nice 16-inch Aquarian Super Kick for the bass batter side, as well as a Remo coated ambassador for the snare batter. While I was out at a music store a while back, I picked up a 10-inch snare side head, and I'm sure I could have reused the one from this kit, but I figured it'd be a worthy investment to buy this head just to get the most that I could out of this drum. Since the hardware was in such nice shape, I didn't have to spend any time removing rust or cleaning them up, so I could get right back to putting these pieces together on the shell, one by one. I was somewhat worried that this darker stain wouldn't look great with the black hardware, because ever since I've been a kid, I was always told black and brown don't match. But on these drums, I think the contrast is pretty nice. As I got the bass drum reassembled and started seating heads, I remembered that I hadn't removed the inlays and the hoops, so I quickly grabbed my heat gun, removed the inlay strips, along with the residue left on the hoops. Once those hoops were back on the shell and the heads tuned up, I removed the logo on the original Rezo side head by using some goof off and a paper towel. I repeated the same process for the snare, and after I had the lugs, butt plate, and throw back on, I tuned up the heads and then moved my attention to the snare wires. For the snare wires, I thought I'd take the time to cut some of this black nylon ribbon to really complete the look of the all black accents on this shell. But after that, I could call this drum a wrap and bring it over into the studio to test out. Overall, I think these drums have a cool vibe, and whether it's that lo-fi hip-hop sound made famous by drummers like Daru Jones, or just a tight, crisp secondary snare sound on a kit, I think these drums have something to offer, but as I was playing them, I just felt like maybe one thing was still missing. I felt a little bad for removing all the sound percussion branding, and I knew with this blank canvas of a front head, maybe I could make it up to the fine folks behind these drums by adding some nice product placement to the front. So without any further ado, let's do one more quick demo so you can see what I came up with. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have plans of running this bass drum over with my car, bringing it into the store, and asking them to fix this drum since I have pro coverage, but I figured I'd avoid that confrontation, and this drum's actually pretty nice, so I don't really feel like destroying it so quickly. And just in case anyone from Guitar Center's corporate office is watching this video, please don't sue me. Go ahead and leave a comment down below if you think you'd have any use for drums like these, and if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel to stay up to date on future weekly video releases. And until next time, thanks.